Hello and welcome to Inside Arvada, the official podcast of the City of Arvada. I'm Sean Starr, one of your hosts, and today our guest is Deputy City Manager Allison Scheck, and Allison joins us to talk about updates to the West 72nd Avenue project. Allie joined the city as the Deputy City Manager in the September of last year. She previously served as the Deputy City Manager for the City of Wheat Ridge and has more than 20 years' experience in both public and private sector leadership. Allie has a master's in public administration from CU Denver and a BA in organization communication from MSU Denver. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Katie Patterson. Hi, Katie.
Hey, Sean. Yeah, really appreciate Allie coming on. Great for our listeners to get to hear from one of our city leaders about something that was a really tough decision to cancel this underpass, a project that is, for our longtime listeners probably know, near and dear to my heart as the infrastructure communications person. This is a project that I work directly on for the communication. So really appreciate her insight into this decision.
Hi, Allie. Welcome to Inside Arvada. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do for the city.
Sure. Hi, Sean. Hi, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. I am the Deputy City Manager here in Arvada, and I live in Arvada, so this is my community, and I just love public service and feel really fortunate to be working in my own community. That's amazing. So my role as Deputy City Manager, it's the best job in the world. It's number 2. It's great. And I work really closely. I oversee the infrastructure, the community and economic development, and the vibrant community and neighborhoods work system. So that's our fancy way of saying parks, golf, trails, open space.
Sean stuff.
You've got it down.
All the Sean stuff. And I also work on homelessness.
Yeah.
So I work on a lot of the public-facing services.
You got the correct communities or community and neighborhoods correctly, singular and plural. So
Thank
very
you.
good.
All right.
And I messed it
Thanks.
up.
I practiced.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we wanted to have you on now because the city just recently announced that they are canceling the underpass portion of the West 72nd widening project. And so that was a big decision and not an expected one by our community, and that was largely due to the escalating costs. So can you just tell us a little bit more about why the city made that decision and how we made that decision?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I'll say this was really, really tough. This is one of those really hard decisions. Unfortunately, it just comes down to cost. This original estimate for this was back in 2018 when we passed a ballot measure. The voters voted on this project with a bond, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, was $64.5 million. And then, we expected some cost escalation. The sort of next best estimate we got was $97.5 million. But right when we got to 100% design and we got that final guaranteed maximum price, that came to $137 million. So double the original estimate that our community was expecting when they voted on the project. And so with that, the staff team, the city manager, city council determined that this is just not the financially prudent thing to do. And we could not afford, it wasn't the right thing to do with our funds to fund the underpass at that cost. It would just mean canceling so many other projects and programs and services that are really critical to our residents.
Yeah, before we get any further into some of the more details on the decision and what happens next, help us understand these bonds and how we got that funding, because I think that's some misconceptions that a lot of folks aren't entirely sure about. Like you mentioned, it was a ballot measure passed to fund these projects through bonds. What is a bond?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about that. So a municipal bond is a type of debt that state and local governments are allowed to issue. They're essentially loans where buyers of the bonds loan the governmental entity, in this case, us, the City of Arvada, money for a project, and in exchange they get interest, and of course they get their principal back. So this kind of debt requires a vote of Arvada residents, and in this case, Arvada residents approved the bond in 2018. And that election, allowing the city to take on $79.8 million in debt to finance the widening on 72nd from Kipling to Sims, and work that is completed, and it's wonderful, on Ralston Road from Yukon to Garrison. So the one thing I just want to point out here, Sean, is that this bond did not include a tax increase. So the money to repay the investors, their principal and interest, was money that the city already had, and that was budgeted. So I think we're hearing from the community some questions around, okay, but what happens to any remaining funds? And there's some choices. At this point, we will be using some money this year in 2026 to restore the corridor from Oak to Kipling, the part that hasn't been done yet, to repave it, and we'll talk about that. But so there is some work to do to clean up, and then what we could do, is hold on to the rest of those funds until we determine what will happen on West 72nd. And if it's determined that other improvements are too expensive, we could use that money to repay the investors early.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people assume because it had to go to a ballot, it had to go to a vote, then that means tax increase, because that's sometimes the case, but it was not the case for this.
No,
one.
we used our existing money to pay that back.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, and then worth noting that some of that 79 million was also spent on 72nd because they did complete the portion of the project from Oak to Sims.
Absolutely.
So, that was completed as well. And so then talk us through a little bit more how we came to these significant cost increases. Mm-hmm. What was happening and how did we kind of not catch this sooner?
Sure, yeah. Several factors come into play in this. So the first thing I'll talk about is something we've all been experiencing in our own lives, and that's inflation. But inflation in the transportation and construction industry has been particularly extreme. In fact, the Colorado indices in this industry show a 9% annual inflation since 2018 when the bond was approved, compared to the historical average of 2.6%. So that's huge.
Yeah, that's 3 times kind of your average inflation expectation there.
And so, and so what was happening at the same time, it was a double whammy. Sure, costs got more expensive, but we had some really big delays, unfortunately, due to our work with the Union Pacific Railroad. Those approvals, that's their railroad crossing. And so the approvals to get the underpass plans, approved just took 3 years longer than we expected during this time of extreme inflation. So again, talk about a double whammy. So while discussions had been underway for years, these approvals delayed this phase. We call it phase 3. The underpass was phase 3 of the project by over 3 years. And, these costs just continued to rise. The underpass itself, that project was supposed to start right when we were finishing the other widening that you talked about earlier, Katie, from Oak to Sims. Right. So the project just would have continued. But unfortunately, we didn't have the approvals. So the crews had to completely demobilize, and you have a lot of cost around demobilization and the remobilization to get the project going again. So, things stalled.
And it's worth noting that was for final design approvals. Like, they had been working through these approvals since before 2018 ballot too. Yeah. So they have to do these rounds of approvals with the railroad long before those last 3 years of delays even, and all of that was just compounding over time. And so it wasn't like, we didn't have approvals from the railroad in 2018 and then all of a sudden we decided we couldn't do this project because costs were so escalated. We did have a partnership that was in progress there, but it just was, became significantly more challenging later into those approval designs.
Yes, and the PUC ultimately, the Public Utilities Commission, gave us that approval in the end in the fall of 2025, and then we were able to proceed with the final estimate, and that's when we learned of the escalating costs. We knew that we were going to exceed that $97 million. We knew, we were predicting that there would be an escalation there, and we were prepared for that. We were not prepared for $40 million extra. Right. And again, determined it's just not the right thing for the community. So I'll also add that cost estimating on these types of projects is inherently difficult. We made these original estimates almost a decade ago. And, without predicting some of the really big global challenges that we've all experienced, including the pandemic and tariffs. So the team is working really hard on different strategies for better estimating so that we don't find ourselves in this position again.
Yeah, so many converging factors kind of all happen at once to get us where we're at and making this very difficult decision for staff and for council. And before, we kind of ended up where we're at now, I'm sure that there was a lot of effort into being like, all right, let's try to make this work. What sort of funding strategies did the city manager's office kind of contemplate and look over to continue and make this project happen because we were so close to starting it?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. We considered everything from cash funding this. Arvada is in a very sound financial position. We are very fortunate. We have an incredible finance team, and we do 10-year modeling on our budget, which is very conservative and protects us well as a community. And I want our listeners to know that.
We have a podcast with our CFO, Brian Archer, and so we can link that back to. I feel like every episode now we're like, there's an episode we can go link back to.
We've done a lot of
he talked all about the 10-year model. So
the 10-year model is, from my perspective, unique. I've worked in 3 other cities, and that's unique here in Arvada. Yeah, and it's really great. But we considered everything from cash funding it, actually, to issuing almost all of that, the delta through with debt, and then everything in between. So to cash fund it, to pay for it all, we are talking about major cancellations of other projects, programs, services, initiatives, positions that then provide those services to the community that our residents and our businesses are counting on. And so we looked at different varying degrees of both of those. All cash, no more debt. All debt, no more cash. Some cash, some debt, again, in varying degrees. But to give some examples of projects that would have been canceled or cut, depending on what level we were looking at, those range the gamut from repaving streets, which is number 2 on our community's list of things we need to improve, the conditions of our roads, depending on which survey result we're looking at. It's always in the top 3. Repaving projects, traffic signal improvements, those would have been canceled or significantly reduced in scope. New playgrounds, again, filling vacant positions in order to deliver services. And so, again, that's where we looked at, can we do it? Yeah. Should we do it?
Right.
And the answer was no.
Yeah.
It's not the right thing to do.
It doesn't make sense to
take
out all those other projects and take time and effort away and funding and sources to all those other things just so we can make this one project happen. So difficult decision, but it makes sense on why we have to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so now they're looking at kind of what happens next. There is still some of the bond funds left, and that road, as you mentioned, is kind of in this interim condition. They haven't been given it maybe as much love as it needs since they knew this work was coming. So what can people look for going forward on 72nd?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So you're right. Interim condition, and I'm not an engineer, but we've been talking a lot about what an interim condition is. And right now, interim condition on 72nd means it still looks a little bit like a construction site. Cars are driving through it, but we didn't tick and tie and tidy up everything because we knew we would be back. So this year, we are going to do that. We're going to clean up. We're going to repave from Kipling to Oak. And we just had a community meeting this week where I think we had some really good ideas and thoughts around things that just need to happen right now to make this feel safe, look good, and work for the community while we figure out our next steps. So like I said, we're going to use some of the bond money to repave and take it out of the interim condition. And while we do that, we're also going to work on the feasibility of an at-grade widening. So right now, like you said, Katie, we've widened Oak to Sims. But when you're coming from Kipling, you've got 2 lanes each direction, and then it narrows right before the railroad track, and then it widens again at Oak. And so what we want to do, and what we heard from our community this week at a public meeting was, it's important. Let's see if we can widen the railroad crossing. That there's no promises there. That will again begin. It's a whole new project. It's a whole new project with the railroad. That's their crossing, and we'll need to see if that's feasible. And it could take 5 to 10 years, and we need to be really realistic about what the cost might look like at that time. But that is the goal. And we're going to start working on it. Yeah,
we had talked about at the community meeting, like, that this is a new project, and that means new engineering designs at all these different levels of design. There's 30, 60, 90, 100% designs, and at each phase, at each touch point, you have to go back to the railroad and get that design approved. And so it is a longer process than folks might think. It's not just like slap some pavement down and widen the road. It's quite a bit more complicated to really do that engineering design.
It is, but we're committed to it,
Yeah.
right? We're committed to the intent of that ballot measure, which was to improve traffic flow and safety on 72nd. And, you know, the new part that's open does that beautifully. And what we just need to do now is make sure that we're connecting that all the way from Kipling.
Definitely. We're going to dust off the old lightning round here in a bit. But before we do that, we like to ask our guests an opportunity to clear up some misconceptions or set the record straight or maybe reiterate some points about what we talked about today. So the floor is yours. Allie, what do you want to clear up or, reiterate again?
Okay, thanks, Sean. Yeah. I think I'd just like to let folks know that, you know, we're not alone here in Arvada in facing these challenges. A number of our neighbors here in the metro area and statewide and nationally have run into substantial cost increases in projects in the last few years. You know, many were well into their projects when they discovered all the additional costs and had to find the funding and had to make those tough decisions and cut other things. Others reduced their scope significantly, and some canceled projects altogether. And as an example, CDOT has modified their plans on the Floyd Hill project, which is really very visible and public around here in Arvada, due to those same cost escalations. We did not want that to happen. When we started digging under the railroad, there was no going back.
Yep.
And that was one of the considerations, actually, in saying we need to cancel this. Things could have got worse in terms of the cost. You know, Denver and the state are experiencing budget shortfalls, and we don't want to put ourselves in that position. And like I said, Arvada's in a really good spot. So I hope our listeners do decide to listen to Brian's podcast if they haven't, our CFO, to learn more about how we do take a fiscally conservative approach here in Arvada, and it's put us into a really good position to do things and to provide services. So the other thing I just would love to share is I just want to reiterate how hard of a decision this was. It's hard to walk away from something you've promised. And we really, there were a lot of sleepless nights not looking for sympathy, but, you know, all the way from our staff to our council, this is tough. And I don't want anyone in the community thinking that these were easy conversations. They weren't. And the other thing I'll say is that transparency is a very important value here in Arvada. And I just want to make sure our listeners know there's so much information on this on our website at arvadaco.gov. There's a really great project page, the West 72nd Bond project page. And there's a great video on there. There's lots of really great materials. So all of there's more information than at your fingertips than you could ask for to really, you know, look further into what was happening on West 72nd and why this decision was made.
Yeah, and for our listeners, if they have specific questions, there's both a survey that's open, like a comment card essentially, through March 1st. And so that'll be available if folks have project-specific questions. We're kind of gathering things there that might bubble up to be kind of FAQs. We already have quite a bit of FAQs on there, but you never know when there's more. And so that's on that page. A link to that survey form is on that page as well as our listeners know they can reach out to us and we'll try and get the answers for them.
That's great. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah. Okay, so our kind of redefined lightning round, I guess, is what we're going to do.
Thanks for not doing trivia. I was really worried about what trivia was going to look like on this.
I guess we could have done some like railroad
Oh,
related
yeah.
stuff or bond stuff,
were like,
but
that
it
sounds
didn't
like,
really sit right.
yeah, it didn't feel like fun trivia. And so instead, we are going to bring back our lightning round in a different format. Just 3 relatively quick questions for folks to kind of get to know you a little bit better.
Sounds great.
Okay, so you mentioned at the beginning that you love public service.
Yeah.
What drew you to public service?
Yeah, I just love it. Local government's where it's at, right? Don't
Absolutely.
you agree?
Yes,
Okay, good.
100%.
It's just so rewarding to be able to, you know, see your community, your work in action in your community. And like I said, I've been with the city now about 4.5 months. I've lived in Arvada almost the entire time I've lived in the States. And to get to actually serve my own community is just really, really special, and kind of see things just right in front of me that I've been working on. I started in local government. I went to the private sector for about 10 years, and I had a great career there. managing sports and arts venues. It was great, but I really did miss the rewarding nature of serving in local government where every day is different, right?
Absolutely.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Every day is so different. We're solving problems that really matter to someone. Right?
Yeah.
Whether that's
I mean,
someone you run into at the grocery store or someone out on the trail, the things we do matter to our neighbors. And I just feel really fortunate I get to do that here.
I was going to say it's a privilege, I think, to serve the community you also live in. It's really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely get an inside or a deeper look into how the projects that we do and the work behind the scenes matters for folks.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could have dinner with one person, past or present, who would it be and why?
Well, again, as a Brit, it's kind of funny, right? But I am really fascinated by Abigail Adams.
Okay.
So when I became a U.S. citizen, I did my homework, and ever since, and I'll tell you, Hamilton helped as well. I'm a big Broadway person.
Yeah.
Definitely Hamilton helped. But, you know, the founding fathers are just fascinating and how this country came to be. But I would love to have dinner with Abigail Adams. My daughter is actually called Abigail.
Oh,
I would say that's influenced
No
by
coincidence.
Abigail Adams. No, I mean, you know,
Wow.
I'm a bit of a fan. I just think some of the early first ladies are really fascinating. But, you know, she was the closest advisor to the second president, her husband, right? John Adams of the U.S. Yeah.
I need
She
to
was a
brush
big
up on
partner.
my
These
history.
women,
Yeah.
these
Just say, I know
women
a ton
were
about- yeah.
instrumental,
Yeah.
actually, in their husband's success. And honestly, I would say in their success. She was an investor. She advocated for women's rights. You know, her husband, we'll just say John, Mr. Adams, he was abroad a lot. He was an ambassador to the UK and to France. And she, you know, had to raise her kids through a plague, just really, really independent. I think she was just a voice of reason. In this weird frenemy relationship between Adams and Jefferson. She was sort of this peacemaker. And I just think she's awesome. I think she's a role model. I'd love my daughter to meet her.
great answer.
Very cool. Yeah, it's a very unique answer
Yeah,
too.
we might have to
That's
use
so
that,
cool.
yeah. I love it.
And then what's one thing that folks might be surprised to learn about you?
Okay, well, sometimes my accent's really American, so I don't think it was
I
on
feel
this
like you're
podcast
kinda-
today.
you're full Brit
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
a little bit Brit.
Yeah.
I just had coffee with a Brit,
There you go.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it could be that.
It was coming out. Yeah.
But I was a child actress.
No way.
I was, yeah. And I, in my childhood, Tomas is like, what? Our friend that's here. I played Annie, would be a good example of a part professionally. I was in commercials. I worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Okay.
And had a pretty decent career as a child actress. And then said, yeah, I've had enough of that and I want to be a normal kid. And my poor parents, who had been chaperoning me and taking me to all these auditions, were either very relieved, probably at that point, or very disappointed. I'm not sure
Yeah.
which.
That's really cool, and I'm a little surprised, but also not surprised. Just because you have such an outgoing personality that I can see it fit. But
Yeah.
I might have to do some Google sleuthing. Is there anything like online that we could?
Yeah,
that's
right.
This is
still
like all
around?
pre-internet, I
Okay.
think.
You never know what you
Yeah.
can dig up.
Those
But yeah.
VHS. That's great, though. And yeah, in the UK, you were born there, and that explains the accent. And
Yeah.
then when you came over, you've lived in the States now for
29 years this summer.
Okay.
Yeah. So normally I have this, I've sort of, my accent comes and goes. When I worked in the private sector, I worked for Cronky Sports, and I was on two-way radios all the time. And I think having to repeat myself beat the accent out of me. So every now and then it comes back
Isn't
up.
it funny, though, you have just one conversation with someone that speaks like that, and it kind of comes back.
Yeah. A local pastor was just meeting from a local church to connect today. We met for coffee, and lo and behold, he's a Brit. So instant bestie.
There you go.
Yeah,
I
that's all
love
it
it.
takes.
And it's one of the
That's
most
so
charming accents. I love it. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. I like yours.
I always say Colorado people don't have accents, right? We kind of just speak maybe a little Southern, some people have said, but
It's quite neutral. Mine is
Yeah.
too, actually, from the UK. Sussex is pretty, because we've got wild accents
Right.
over there. But let me ask you, is it Arvada?
Arvada.
It's Arvada.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Arvada.
Yeah, like Nevada.
Right.
That's what I always tell people.
That's a sure sign that someone is not from Colorado, I feel like, if they say Arvada.
Arvada.
Yep. So,
Yep.
or from the UK.
Well, Allie, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Sean. This was great. Honored to be invited.
As a reminder, we love hearing from our listeners, and you can stay in touch by texting us using the link at the top of the show notes, or you can also reach out via email at podcast@arvada.org. We love hearing feedback about what you enjoy and what you'd like to see done differently, episodes, ideas, and more. Now on to our news section. Arvada Winterfest is coming up here on Saturday, February 28th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. in Olde Town, Arvada. This is the Arvada Festival Commission's annual multicultural celebration featuring a whole bunch of different interactive performances from a variety of different cultures and traditions. To learn more and to see a schedule of events, visit arvadaco.gov/Winterfest. As we mentioned in the last couple of episodes, the best way to stay up to date on events like Winterfest and everything else going on around the city is through visitarvada.org, and there's a newsletter you can subscribe to. That's the Visitor Center's email list and website, and Gene Gordon from the Visitor Center does a great job of compiling all the great and fun, interesting stuff going on throughout the city.
Yeah, and it may not feel like spring is on its way, but the 2026 Resource Central programming is kicking off soon. And so that's a partnership the city holds for outdoor water saving programs for our Arvada water customers. And we're actually going to have someone from Resource Central on our next episode, so stay tuned for more information about everything they offer and how to participate. And then the Garden in the Box presale and lawn replacement applications do start up in March, so coming soon. Thank you again to our guest today, Allison Scheck. Be sure to listen to next time's episode. Like I mentioned, it'll be Marketing Director Rachel Stotts from Resource Central, all about their partnership with us. The podcast was recorded and edited by Arvada Media Services.
And today's fun fact is that West 72nd Avenue serves more than 20,000 vehicles per day.
Whoa.